With just over a month before U.S. President-elect Joe Biden takes the oath of office, President Trump has little chance of achieving a comeback. Biden's selection of cabinet members will be a key indicator of future policies of his administration, especially of his China policy. So what do the choices tell us so far? What will be the Biden administration's approach to relations with China, and what changes can be expected in trade, foreign policy, and response to the pandemic and economic recovery? To talk about these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Mr. Teng Jianqun. He is the director of the Department of American Studies for the China Institute of International Studies, and via satellite by Benoit Hardy Chatrand, adjunct professor of political science and international affairs from Temple University in Japan, and via Skype by Peter Kuznick, professor of history from American University. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. Let's first look at the pick of the cabinet members of President-elect Joe Biden. He announced some of the picks, several firsts. Mr. Teng, for example, probably the first female director of national intelligence, and first Latino secretary of Homeland Security, and first female secretary of Treasury. So what do you make of his pick for the key cabinet members?
This is actually a commitment made by Joe Biden during the presidential campaign this year. He would like to have a cabinet including different ethnic groups and different background for their professional careers. So this is actually a policy by Joe Biden to have such a comprehensive cabinet represents all the groups of the Americans.
And Peter, what does his choice reflect his policy preferences and probably future foreign policy preferences?
People he's chosen so far are all Obama hands. These are people who are in the Obama-Biden administration. They're known quantities. They're not big thinkers. They're not bold thinkers. They don't have a lot of new ideas. These are, in essence, the foreign policy advisors have been people who have supported American intervention all over the world. They supported the invasion of Afghanistan. They supported the invasion of Iraq. They supported the invasion of Libya. They doubled down on sending more troops and more arms into Syria. So these are not anti-interventionists by any means. They're fairly traditional, liberal, global internationalists who want to see the United States lead the world again. They see the Trump period as an aberration, as the United States stepping back from world leadership. And these people all say they want to reassert American leadership, meaning American hegemony.
So you're basically saying that this is a repeat of Obama administration. Will that also mean the foreign policy will be Obama 2.0?
Not necessarily, because the world has changed pretty dramatically in the 4 years since Obama left office, since the 12 years that Obama took office. So I'm hopeful that maybe some of them have learned from some of their mistakes. But if we look at the comments they've made in recent years, there's not really any evidence to suggest that they have. But it is possible that they have, and it's possible that Biden has. Biden is an older man, and Biden is not known for a lot of energy and new thinking, but there have been some positive signs coming from Biden over the years that give me at least a little bit of hope at this point that maybe there's some new wisdom. Maybe there's some new thinking, some new approaches that can turn this into a more progressive, more positive foreign policy team.
And Benoit, the signature foreign policy of Obama, I remember, still pivot to Asia. So will Biden double down on that?
Well, that remains to be seen for sure if we listen to some of the pronouncements by President-elect Biden, as well as a lot of the appointments that he had made so far. There's no doubt that they are going to focus a lot on Asia. Whether it is the first priority remains to be seen. We know that Joe Biden will want to reestablish, repair ties, the Atlantic ties with Europe. That's going to be another priority. But when it comes to Asia, although Biden has not, we haven't used the words pivot to Asia or rebalance to Asia, the way that they have talked, the way that himself and his appointees have talked about the region, it does look like we are going to see an America that's going to reassert its presence in the region, which was basically the purpose, the main purpose of the rebalance to Asia. But of course, Joe Biden is going to want to develop and to elaborate his own policies, his own approach to the region, which is different, or which at least will have a different name from Obama. How different it is going to be remains, of course, to be seen.
Let's talk about the foreign policy of Biden, especially on China. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi expressed his wish to say, quote, restart China-U.S. relations. But in the last days of Trump administration, the Treasury Department announced sanctions against the 14 Chinese officials on the same day. And also there are a lot of confrontations over Hong Kong, over South China Sea, Xinjiang, and the trade. So do you think what Trump has left for Biden is making him more difficult to have a China policy or easier?
You're right. I think Donald Trump just made the situation, the policy toward China very complicated this time. And a lot of obstacles have been set up by Donald Trump for President-elect Biden, just because some of the Americans today, they have a very negative perception on China. For example, they would like to compete with China with all possible measures, including the sanctions against Chinese high-ranking officials. So I think this is actually a basic thought of a foundation for any leader, to carry out, normal policy toward China. I'm sure Biden is quite familiar with the situation he's facing now, especially the perception in the United States toward China, because the Americans are worried about the future of China, and they also worried about their hegemony in the world. So at this moment, I don't think Joe Biden can change anything this time. So just follow the momentum. But I think Joe Biden will change a little bit. She might be a little bit soft toward China, not only use tariffs against China and use sanctions against Chinese officials, but I think Joe Biden would like to use the military allies in this region and also use the so-called rule of law. For example, the reform in WTO, and the United States might enter TPP and give some restrictions on China's involvement in international trade, international economic cooperation. So another way I think Biden would like to pick up for his policy toward China.
I still remember about 4 or 5 years ago, Biden said that China's rise does not necessarily mean America's demise. But the problem is, in the current context, he probably wouldn't want to say something like that, because the American political sentiment is so against China. And do you think that will bind his hands when he's making choices on China?
Yeah, I think he will follow the suit of President Trump. Weeks ago, he said that Russia is a main threat to the United States, but China is the main competitor to the United States. So I think he's quite familiar with the situation, the relations with China, and he will change something toward China, for example, give a very soft policy and resume dialogue like economy and the strategy dialogue with China. Trump suspended all these exchanges with China. I'm sure Biden, after he took the office in the White House, he will resume these channels to exchange ideas and to maintain a relatively stable relations with China.
And also, Peter, let's talk about the approach of possible Biden foreign policies, because the debate in Washington is whether the U.S. should knock-cast to get allies on board or take a soft approach. And Anthony Blinken, his choice for Secretary of State, and others, has said a coalition of the truly willing will be sustainable in terms of dealing what they see as the challenges that China poses. That basically means that they will have a united front against China with allies. But the coalition of the willing, are they willing the same thing? And how gonna form a coalition?
One of the things that Trump did is he blew up America's alliances. His idea of make America great again and this America First policy went against United States traditional European allies especially, but also in many ways against South Korea, against Japan, even Australia. So Biden's approach is probably, and we don't know for sure, so we still don't know, but Biden's approach would probably be to create this united front against China, to create a united front of European allies and Asian allies in order to try to change China's policy. And at the same time, the United States will likely continue building up its military alliances in the Pacific. Alliance with Australia, alliance with India, alliance with Japan, alliance with South Korea. So I don't see the United States retrenching. Biden's rhetoric during the campaign was to be tougher than Trump. So when Biden gets in there, is he likely to cut back on tariffs? Likely to improve trade relations? Probably not. Is he likely to cut back on sanctions quickly? Probably not. But Biden at least is smarter than Trump in the sense, and the people around him are smarter than the people around who are around Trump. And they know that the United States needs China in other ways. So hopefully we'll reach out to China. One of the big issues that's likely to confront the United States quickly is dealing with North Korea. Biden knows he cannot deal effectively with North Korea unless he has help from China. So that's one positive, potentially. Another is climate change, where Trump was not only not interested in climate change and dealing with climate change, Trump reinforced climate change. Trump wanted to bring global warming on even quicker with his stupid policies. Biden is smarter than that. Biden is strongly committed to dealing with the environmental crisis. And again, he knows that China is absolutely essential for that. So the question is, will the positive side of Biden reach out toward China with a reset, and maybe we'll have some working relationship that can help us deal with the other issues like arms control, like trade, like the South China Sea, like Hong Kong, like the Uyghur issue, human rights. So maybe that's possible, that we can build up a foundation of trust and begin to work together. That's what many of us hope will be the approach.
And then what will be the allies of the United States thinking now, considering that Biden is probably more multilateralist?
Yes, absolutely. Well, many of the allies, we can see from their reaction to Biden's victory, welcomed his victory. They breathed a sigh of relief. That was pretty audibly heard around the world. If you look at, for example, France, Germany, you have Japan, obviously in the region, South Korea. All of them were pretty happy to see Biden being elected, and because it was pretty obvious from Biden's pronouncement during the campaign, as well as the numerous articles that were penned by either himself or the people around him. I'm thinking, of course, about the future likely Secretary of State Blinken, if he is approved by the Senate. All of these people have really made extremely clear their commitment to multilateralism. So as Peter was saying earlier, what we're likely to see is an America that makes sure, or that is much more willing to make sure that the allies are on board when it comes to any kind of large or advancing its vision of the world and its vision in Asia when it comes to confronting China on certain issues, when it comes to cooperating with China on other issues. There's going to be a much greater willingness and much greater efforts to make sure that close allies are on board, which clearly was not the case during the 4 years of Donald Trump.
And also, Peter, it seems that Biden is more ideology-driven because he promised during his first year in office he will organize and host a global summit for democracy to renew the spirit and shared purposes of the nations of the free world. He's obviously insinuating opponent countries like China and Russia, but do you think he will willingly fulfill his target of rallying all those Western democracy countries together, considering the context that American democracy is not working so well right now?
Yes, I think this idea of the United States as a great shining example of human democracy and human rights is really laughable at this point. You've got one political party in the United States, the Republicans, who have turned basically into a fascistic death cult and not even a political party anymore. And they're trying to overthrow the results of an election in which Biden won overwhelmingly. It's not as if it was a close election. Biden won by 7 million votes. So, and they're still doing everything they can to subvert democracy. So I think Biden's got a lot of work to do here at home.
Yeah.
The danger, in my mind, I see Biden's comments about American exceptionalism. I see Blinken's comments about American exceptionalism. Sullivan, the National Security Advisor's comments about American exceptionalism. They all say not only is the United States back at the table, but the United States wants to sit at the head of the table. The United States wants to lead. Well, maybe that was true during the 1990s and early 2000s, before the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq and the collapse of democracy here in the United States. But I don't think the United States is in much of a position right now to assert moral leadership in the world. So, but the problem is, so you've got Biden, or at least you have Trump talking about making America great again. Now Biden's talking about American leadership at the same time that Putin wants to make Russia great again. Xi wants to make China great again. Modi wants to make India great again. What we need is to be the leaders to be sitting down and working together upon real problems. The pandemic should have taught us something about the kind of integrated world that we're actually living in. And the crisis with the global economy right now, I mean, we've got big issues that we need to work on together to resolve.
Mr. Tung, how does China look at Biden's thinking of becoming global leader again and rallying those allies, probably against China and Russia?
Yeah, this is a possibility for Biden to do so. I mean, to adopt ideology-oriented policy toward China, just to put all these airlines against China. Early next year, the UK Royal Navy will send a battle group, carrier battle group to Asia Pacific region. This is not only a presence for that country. This is actually, in my opinion, is enlargement of NATO. They would like to be involved in the affairs, especially security affairs in this region, as NATO foreign ministers mentioned early this month. They all said the rising of China has been a threat to international peace and stability, and NATO would like to be involved in this. This is actually a policy by the United States, but the NATO members, they would like to be here, in Asia Pacific region. So I think Biden will do that, policy toward China. And of course, China, I think, China is very confident in this regard, because after at least 4 years, we have learned a lot from the competition with the United States. So I think this time, China should be very cautious about the oriented policy toward China by the United States, but we are well prepared to deal with any challenge or provocation from the United States, as we have seen in recent 4 years. I think China is ready to accept any policy by Joe Biden.
Peter, another thing is, of course, competition, because Biden said to win the competition for future against China, U.S. must sharpen its innovative edge. And Blinken also expressed similar idea that the U.S. must vigorously deploy future technologies and maintain its leading edge over China. But we don't know whether Biden will continue the sanctions and the technology blockage against some Chinese company as Trump did. What will be his approach to win the competition specifically?
Well, Biden is going to begin to invest in the United States in ways that the Trump administration has not done. So Biden is going to want to rebuild American infrastructure. He's going to want to invest in those areas, advanced technologies, in ways that hasn't been going on. So the United States has lost some of its technological edge in recent years. And we don't know how that's going to translate in terms of sanctions or in terms of Chinese technology. And I don't have a clear sense of that yet. And Biden has not really articulated that from what I've seen. He's just talked more broadly about competition with China and asserting U.S. dominance once again.
And Benoit, Japan also was in a similar situation in the 1980s and 70s, the technological competition with the United States. So how do other countries in the global value chain think about the competition between number one and number two economies, which might involve all of them?
Right, indeed. While other countries in the region especially have been quite affected by this technological competition, they have been affected as well by the trade war between the United States and China. And that has forced some of the countries in the region, especially Japan, obviously, to reconsider or to try to make its supply chains more resilient. So there have been a lot of talks here in Japan to diversify the supply chains on which it depends. So that is something that the Japanese government and other governments in the region as well are going to look toward. They're going to look to Joe Biden, this new administration, to have a more coherent approach and perhaps work more closely with its allies in a way that its approach to technological competition is not going to hinder or undermine the United States allies like Japan, South Korea, and other partners in Southeast Asia.
And Mr. Tong, let's also look at some other cabinet positions and key positions in this government. Catherine Tai will succeed trade czar Robert Lighthizer, hopefully. She has been saying China should be addressed forcefully and strategically. And her fluency in Mandarin is probably the first for a trade representative for the United States. And also, according to Axios, the former presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg might be appointed a high-level ambassadorship, possibly the Chinese ambassador. What about the personnel choices of these people signify?
I think this is one part of Biden's policy toward China. I mean, the representative just will give some influence not only on China but also on the reform of WTO. I think she's quite familiar with the rule of law in this area, and also she's quite familiar with the situation in China. And Buttigieg, a young man at the age of 38, I'm sure during the campaign he gave a very clear-cut explanation on China. He said the United States should give some competition with China. So I think he will carry out the policy by Biden, as a cabinet member or a representative of the United States. All these guys or ladies will give very direct impact on the policy toward China. So I think this is this time just to show Biden's idea he would like to deal with China in the future.
Peter, earlier you mentioned that Biden is a septuagenarian, but he has picked some young people in his cabinet. Will their thinking influence his policy? In which direction?
They've pretty much been on the same page in terms of policies over the years. Blinken, Sullivan, they've worked very closely with Biden for quite some time. There's some space between them. And on the troop buildup in Afghanistan, Biden was opposed to the surge of troops under Obama in Afghanistan, where most of his advisors were in favor of it. The bombing, the intervention into Libya, the invasion of Libya, Biden was very hesitant about that, whereas his advisors were gung-ho on that. So I see, in some ways, Biden is less hawkish than some of his advisors. Sure, he supported the invasion of Iraq and initially Afghanistan and the buildup in Syria, and big advocate of NATO and NATO expansion, and kind of he's attacked Russia. He's called Putin a thug, and he's talked about Russia as a kleptocracy, and he's had all of that kind of aggressive rhetoric. But I've also seen some signs that Biden might be less hawkish, less interventionist, less confrontationist. And Biden, we see, he bends over backwards to his adversaries in the Republican Party here, to other people. He's more of a conciliator in terms of his approach and his rhetoric and his instincts. So I hope that that's the mood that prevails in this new administration, rather than the hard-line, confrontational, America tough guy kind of role. We don't know yet which Biden is going to appear. But at least there's initially some grounds for hope.
Benoit, do you think Biden will surprise us in any way?
Well, that's hard to say. I think if we look at what he said, and if we look at, his thinking on foreign policy is quite well known. He's been working very closely on foreign policy for 50 years. So as far as surprises, I think we're unlikely to see that. His nominations on his cabinet, as Jake Sullivan as well, as National Security Advisor, we know what their vision of the world is. They were all involved in the Obama administration. So I don't think we're likely to see very major changes, and that includes as well with the approach to China, although we are likely to see a much more nuanced approach than what we saw with Trump. But the era of a kind of confrontational approach is something we're going to have to get used to when it comes to America's relations with China.
All right. Thank you very much, Benoit. Thank you, all the guests, for Mr. Tang, and also Peter, for your intakes. And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Joe in Beijing. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye. Science has never been more important than now. What is the major difference of being a scientist from being an average person?
Scientists, they are working on what we do not know.
A good scientist is wrong 90% of the time, and a really good scientist is wrong 99% of the time.
What is scientific spirit?
Ability to judge scientifically, judge correctly.
Science is the discovery of the truth.
Science needs to be a problem solver.
Science can enlighten our life.